Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today we listen to a calm summary of a story that begins like a riddle and develops its tension precisely through that uncertainty. The Marquise of O by Heinrich von Kleist, first published in 1808. A tale about honor, shame, social pressure, and a question that changes everything. In a small Italian town during unsettled times, the Marquise of O lives with her children in her parents' house. She is widowed, considered respectable, educated, and dutiful. Her life follows firm rules. She is protected by reputation, family, and the order of a world in which every place and every role seems clearly assigned. But this order suddenly breaks apart. A military assault strikes the town. Soldiers force their way in, people flee, doors are broken down, chaos reigns. The Marquise's house is not spared. In the midst of the confusion, she finds herself in danger, defenseless among armed men, with no way to resist. At that moment, an officer steps forward and rescues her. He drives off the attackers, stands protectively before her, ensures that no further harm comes to her. To the Marquise, he appears like a sudden apparition, decisive, fearless, almost noble. A stranger who brings control and protection in a moment of complete powerlessness. After this rescue, the Marquise is exhausted, shaken, barely aware. The events have overwhelmed her. She is brought to safety, cared for, and the household attempts to regain control. The officer remains nearby, shows interest in her, seeks her proximity, seems unusually moved by what has happened. In the days that follow, a deceptive calm returns. The assault is over, the town begins to recover, and the Marquise's family tries to restore order. The officer visits her and is received politely as someone to whom gratitude is owed. For her parents, he is a hero. For the Marquise, he is a mixture of savior and stranger. His behavior is striking, not impolite, not intrusive, but inwardly restless, as though he carries a decision within him that he can hardly control. He speaks with the family, repeatedly looks at the Marquise as if he must say something that is difficult for him. Finally, he expresses a wish that surprises everyone. He wants to marry the Marquise. The family is confused. The Marquise herself is speechless. She hardly knows this man. There has been no ordinary courtship, no time, no gradual acquaintance. Everything feels rushed. And precisely for that reason, it feels not romantic, but enigmatic. The Marquise refuses, not harshly, but firmly. She thanks him for the rescue, yet a marriage to a stranger is unthinkable for her. The officer does not accept the refusal like a typical suitor. He appears wounded, almost desperate, and withdraws, as though something has slipped from his grasp. After the officer's abrupt retreat, the family attempts to return to its usual order. The Marquise devotes herself again to her children, manages the household, keeps her distance from anything that might recall the events. Outwardly, life seems to settle, yet inwardly, something remains unresolved. The officer sends no word. Weeks pass. To her parents, the matter now appears closed. The hasty proposal seems, in retrospect, like the odd impulse of a man carried away by an extreme situation. For the Marquise, however, a quiet unease remains, a sense that something is unfinished. Then she notices a change in herself. At first, it is only discomfort, fatigue, dizziness, a physical uncertainty she cannot interpret. She pays little attention to it, attributing it to the strain of the past weeks. But the symptoms persist and intensify. Gradually, she realizes what these signs might mean. The thought strikes her with full force and is immediately rejected. It cannot be. It must not be. The Marquise examines her memory, her certainties, her moral self-confidence. Everything contradicts this suspicion, and yet it can no longer be suppressed. In silent despair, she seeks medical advice. The examination brings certainty. The Marquise is pregnant. For a moment, the world seems to stand still. This fact fits no image, no explanation, no order she believes in. She knows with absolute certainty that she is conscious of no wrongdoing. There is no man she can name, no act she could reproach herself for. The pregnancy is a fact, and at the same time, a riddle. The Marquise does not react hysterically or loudly. Her disbelief is quiet, controlled. She reflects. She examines every possibility. She searches for a logical connection, for a memory she might have overlooked. But there is none. The thought of society, of her family, of the unavoidable scandal now comes to the forefront. An unmarried, respected woman, a mother, a daughter from a good house, pregnant, without a known father. The stigma would be irreversible. At first, she decides to remain silent. She hopes for time, for clarity, for some explanation that might emerge on its own. But with each passing day, she realizes more clearly that she cannot evade this truth, and that she will eventually be forced to say something no one will believe. The Marquise stands at the beginning of a conflict that concerns not only her life, but the very image of morality, order, and guilt. And she does not yet know that silence is no solution here. The Marquise cannot maintain her silence for long. The changes in her body become more evident. Her inner unrest grows. Finally, she sees herself compelled to inform her parents. She chooses a moment of calm and speaks the truth, plainly, without tears, without dramatic gestures. The reaction is violent. Her mother is stunned, her father beside himself. Disbelief quickly turns into outrage. The possibility that the Marquise herself might be the victim of an incomprehensible event is scarcely considered. In her father's eyes, something else stands at the forefront: the honor of the family. He demands an explanation, a name, a culprit. But the Marquise can offer nothing except her conviction that she is aware of no misconduct. This statement does not reassure her parents. It provokes them. To them, it sounds like evasion, like a refusal to assume responsibility. Her father reacts harshly. He speaks of deception, of disgrace, of betrayal of everything he believed he had instilled in his daughter. Her mother wavers between compassion and fear of social judgment. The conversation ends not with clarification, but with rupture. The Marquise is driven from the house. Suddenly she stands alone, without protection, without support, separated from the order that had sustained her life. She withdraws with her children and settles modestly elsewhere. This outward rejection intensifies her inner isolation and, at the same time, her resolve. For now, she understands that she must act. The Marquise makes an unusual decision. She publishes a notice. Publicly, openly, without embellishment. In it, she declares her pregnancy and calls upon the father of the child to come forward, assume responsibility, and marry her. She promises to accuse no one, only to seek clarity. This notice is a scandal. It contradicts every social expectation. A woman who does not hide but speaks publicly, who does not beg but demands. For many, this is outrageous. For others, bewildering. For the Marquise herself, it is the only way to regain control over her situation. While the town speaks about her, she waits. Not hopefully, not despairingly, but composed. She knows that this action will have consequences, and she is prepared to bear them. And she does not yet suspect that someone will read this notice with very particular attention. The notice does not remain without effect. The town speaks of nothing else. Rumors arise, interpretations multiply, moral judgments are pronounced. The Marquise becomes the object of public curiosity and public condemnation. Yet she herself remains steadfast. She does not withdraw, does not further explain herself. She waits. And then someone responds. The officer who once rescued her returns. He appears again in her parents' house, polite, determined, outwardly composed. His demeanor has changed. Where there was once restlessness, there is now resolution. He requests a conversation, not only with the Marquise, but with the entire family. Her parents react with surprise, almost relief. In him, they see a possibility of ending the scandal and restoring order. The officer declares that he is ready to marry the Marquise, without conditions, without demands. He presents himself as the solution. For her parents, the offer is tempting. A marriage would preserve honor, erase the stain, re-establish social order. They urge the Marquise to consent. They speak of reason, of necessity, of what must be done. The Marquise, however, responds with reserve. She recalls his earlier proposal, his sudden closeness, his enigmatic behavior. She asks for reasons, for motives. The officer answers evasively. He emphasizes his affection, his readiness to assume responsibility, but says nothing about what truly matters. The Marquise senses that something remains unspoken. Despite the pressure, she refuses again. Not out of defiance, not out of pride, but because she demands clarity. She wants to know why he, of all people, wishes to marry her, and what connects him to her pregnancy. Without this truth, any marriage would seem to her another lie. This refusal brings her once more into conflict with her parents. Her father, in particular, reacts angrily. He sees in her behavior disobedience, stubbornness, another threat to the family's honor. Words are spoken that cannot be taken back. The officer withdraws again. But this time something heavier remains. The impression that the solution is drawing closer without the truth being spoken, and that this very truth is the core of the entire conflict. The Marquise stands once more alone between the expectations of society and her own claim to honesty, and the room for evasion grows smaller. The conflict within the family intensifies further. The Marquise's father sees no other way out than the swift restoration of outward order. For him, what matters is how things appear, not how they came about. The pregnancy without a known father remains for him an intolerable stain that must be removed. He presses again for marriage to the officer. For him, this union is already decided, even without complete explanation. The Marquise, however, remains firm in her position. She is prepared to bear any consequence, poverty, exclusion, social contempt, but not to enter into a marriage founded on concealment. This steadfastness drives her father to despair. He experiences it as provocation, as moral presumption. In a violent outburst, he casts his daughter out definitively. Her mother, torn between compassion and obedience, submits in silence. The Marquise withdraws with her children and now lives entirely independent of her family. This period is marked by outward simplicity and inner tension. She lives quietly, avoids contact, focuses on what is necessary. And yet in this seclusion she feels, for the first time, not directed by others. The officer remains present, indirectly. He inquires about her, sends messages, shows himself determined to carry through the marriage. His behavior appears both patient and relentless. He seems convinced that everything is only a matter of time. Then, an unexpected turn occurs. The Marquise's father falls gravely ill. The family order wavers once more. In this crisis, her mother seeks contact with her daughter. She asks for reconciliation, for closeness, for return. The father, weakened and unsettled, finally relents. The Marquise returns to her parents' house. Yet this return brings no solution. The tensions remain, only quieter, beneath the surface. The question of the pregnancy is not resolved, only postponed. Her parents still hope for marriage. The Marquise hopes for truth. And the officer waits, patient, certain, as though he knows that time works in his favor. The Marquise's return to her parents' house brings outward calm, but no inner clarification. The family once again lives under one roof, speaks politely, avoids open conflict. Yet the central issue remains unspoken, and in that silence lies its weight. The officer appears again, this time not as a suitor but as someone confident of his cause. He meets the Marquise with respect, almost with restraint. His words are measured, his demeanor controlled. He renews his wish for marriage without pressing, and precisely this calm is unsettling. Her parents continue to see in him the rescue. For them, it is clear that this union would end everything: the gossip, the doubt, the uncertainty. They appeal to the Marquise's reason, to her responsibility toward her children. The Marquise listens and remains steadfast. She declares that she would not reject a marriage if it rested on truth. But as long as she does not know what truly happened, she cannot consent. To her family, this position appears irrational. For them, the outcome counts, not the path to it. The officer does not react with anger. On the contrary, he shows patience, almost composure. He seems to trust that everything will resolve itself. This certainty strengthens the impression that he knows more than he says. Between their encounters, the Marquise begins to remember, not in clear images, but in suggestions, in sensations. She thinks of the day of the assault, of the confusion, of her loss of consciousness, of the moment when her awareness ceased. These memories are fragmentary, yet they leave no doubt that something occurred she could not fully grasp. This realization shakes her, not because she feels guilt, but because she understands how vulnerable her self-assurance had been. She recognizes that innocence is not always identical with memory, and that truth sometimes begins where certainty ends. In this inner movement, her view of the officer changes. She no longer sees him only as rescuer or suitor, but as part of an event she herself had long been unable to name. The question is no longer whether he plays a role, but which one. The space for repression closes. The decision draws near, and with it, the truth that will reorder everything. The truth does not arrive in a grand confession, nor in a dramatic scene. It reveals itself gradually, almost incidentally, and precisely through that it unfolds its full weight. The officer finally declares that he is prepared to reveal everything, but only after the marriage. Not out of calculation, but out of a desire to restore order before looking into the disorder. The Marquise consents to the marriage, not out of blindness, not out of submission, but from conscious decision. She recognizes that social reality leaves her no space for another solution, and that she can nonetheless preserve her stance within that reality. After the wedding comes the revelation. The officer confesses that during the turmoil of the assault he took advantage of the situation. In the moment when the Marquise was unconscious, he acted. Without violence in an open sense, but without consent. The act was real, and yet long suppressed, concealed, embedded within a structure of decorum and silence. The Marquise hears this truth without collapse. She is shaken, but not surprised. Much now falls into place. The hasty proposal, the persistence, the strange mixture of guilt and determination. The truth confirms what she had long sensed inwardly. Yet instead of immediately dissolving the marriage or reacting publicly, she makes an unexpected decision. She separates from her husband physically. She continues to live with dignity, with distance, with control over her own life. The marriage exists, but it is not submission. It is a framework she determines herself. Only after the birth of the child does she draw closer to the officer again, not out of forgetting, not out of simple forgiveness, but from a conscious new beginning. The relationship does not arise from passion, but from acknowledgement of the truth and the responsibility that follows from it. At the end stands no romantic reconciliation, but a new order, an order in which guilt is named without destroying everything, in which the Marquise does not disappear as a victim, but remains as a person who acts. The story does not end with a verdict, but with a demand upon the reader. That truth does not always liberate, that order is not always just, and that self-determination sometimes begins within the boundaries one cannot step outside. And with that, our story for today comes to an end. A story about order, truth, and the question of whom that order truly serves. Perhaps you are now wondering, how strongly does this calm, short version differ from Kleist's sober, almost relentless original? In what social position does the Marquise truly stand, as widow, mother, and woman of rank? And how deeply is this story shaped by the moral expectations and power structures of its time? We explore these and other questions in our accompanying book, Golden Pages, Volume 2. You will find the link in the description. And if you like, we will listen together again tomorrow. Good night.